Okay, looks like we're recording now. Okay, and yeah, just a suggestion to mute yourselves, I guess, when you're not speaking, just in case there's noise. All right, so we're gonna get started. Hi, everyone. Thank you for staying with us and for watching films at SF Indie Fest. Really happy to have all of the, or some of the filmmakers for this program, Shorts 4, That's No Way to Say Goodbye, with us today. Thank you all for being here. So I'm going to kind of ask a question, and instead of having, who's ever the loudest answer first, I will kind of choose who answers first and kind of go in a circular fashion, if that works for everybody. Let's see. So the first way I'd like to start is just kind of knowing what started the projects, what started your films, what was it, what was the genesis? How did your story come to be, and why did you choose to tell it? So let's start with you, Eric, and your film, Amy from Outer Space.
What's up, everybody? Thanks for having me. This is an honor. Yeah, the genesis for Amy from Outer Space was, this all started when pandemic, like the early stages, right before the lockdown. Like we were hearing about the news from Wuhan and all this. We're like, man, that's really rough over there. Like, like living our lives here. And then boom. And I had everything planned out for the year. I had my hands on the wheel, like everything is going my way because I'm in the driver's seat, and I wasn't. That's quite often the case. So I was here, and it was hot in my apartment because I don't have AC. I'm in Los Angeles, and I was just like, what am I going to do? What are any of us going to do? So I was writing a bunch of different stories, and I came up with Amy from Outer Space. And really, I think we all were forced to go inward, or some people just chose not to go inward. That's also the case, but I definitely did. And I wanted to create something because I realized that I don't know when I'm going to be able to work. I don't know what the deal is here in the city. And there was a lot of fear. I did get sick, and I was like, I had the fever and the no taste and all that stuff the time I was writing. And then that's where I developed this. And that was sort of just like a vomit of emotion. But yeah, that's where it came from.
Thank you for sharing that. I hope all things considered, you're feeling better and the worst is behind you. Okay, Phil, what was the inspiration for You'll Make It in Florida?
It was, I can't say it's one particular thing, but I always wanted to make I spent the first half of my life living in Florida. Obviously, I have a very complicated relationship with it because I left, but having spent time away from it, I always wanted to do something, like reflect on my life there, my experience there, but I didn't want to do it in a literal way and like an autobiographical way. So I decided to take things from my childhood that I loved, the types of things I grew up watching. I mean, it's a long story, but my parents immigrated to Florida from Russia. So I grew up sort of in a non-English speaking household. So my connection to American culture was watching a lot of television. And then, so I think being in that kind of environment in a foreign, looking at through like a foreign lens, through American culture, that is, I think I wanted to take my experiences living in the landscape of Florida, combine it with the things that I grew up watching, such as like old Disney films, a lot of old sitcoms, a lot of old after school specials. And so I wanted to take the feelings of those kinds of things and combine it with the landscape of Florida to create almost like a Valentine to Florida, but gently satirizes it as well. But I know Florida is a ripe subject for ridicule, but I didn't want to take the easy path because there's so much out there in the vein of like Florida Man and making fun of Florida, which I thought was sort of an easy route. So I decided to satirize it in a way. I decided to go the opposite route and to glorify it, make it seem like this idyllic paradise. And then at the same time, combine it with like these old Disney films and like television interstitials and things that I grew up watching to create this musical Disney-esque experience, I guess, for adults. So that's kind of the genesis of it.
All right, thank you. Tom and Robert, what started off The Poet and the Plant?
Rob, you should kick it off.
Yeah, it started with just this interaction I had with a friend of mine who I just met at this weird poetry reading, and we ended up just hanging out on a bench. And I told her about all these plants I was killing unintentionally. And she listened to me, and then she just gave me this beautiful text later that day saying, you know, you should probably just give them sunlight and fresh air. And the next time you take your bike out, strap the staghorn to the front of it. And I think that right there, that image of strapping a staghorn fern to the front of the bike is what sort of ignited the idea. And I ended up just writing a little poem about it. But yeah, it was really just the image of like me and on a bike with a plant tied to the front of it, to the prelude to the Traviata, which for some reason was what was inspiring me at that time. And that image sort of just kickstarted the whole thing.
Yeah, and then Rob came to me with it as a poem, and then together we sort of forced it into screenplay format, and very quickly just jumped right into making the movie.
Thank you. So I think it's a real testament that we have 3 films represented here, and each one really has a very distinct style and point of view. I don't know if you've all seen each other's films yet, but I hope you are able to. I was just really blown away by how original all of these films were. So I'm curious, we'll start with you, Eric, kind of maybe explain a little bit like what maybe some of your influences were, or how did you come up with the tone and style and look of your film, kind of the overall, you know, visual feeling, emotional feeling of the film?
Yeah, I'm really infatuated with 40s, 50s, 60s, the music, the style, wallpaper, phones, etc. And you know, I also like laugh tracks on I Love Lucy, and just that vibe, that sort of like things are bubbling under the perfect surface. And David Lynch is my favorite. And I was showing my girlfriend, she had never seen Lost Highway or Mulholland Drive. And I'm like, where are you from? Like, are you from outer space? Like what? So I was showing her these films, and this is around the same time. So I wanted to create something that was stylized in that way, with where we can go back in time, but also ambiguous in time. Like we don't need to specifically say this is in the late 50s, but maybe there's some props, some set design where you're like, wow, it's interesting. And that's really what I was after, is like packing a punch with imagery that is unique, like the kaleidoscope, the blow up doll in the film, the color of the dress. And my DP, he's like LA's best kept secret. His name is Josh Chiara, and he is phenomenal. But that's what we were after in this, and setting a mood, going from, you know, everything that was dreamy and fantastical was an anamorphic lens, and everything that we shot anamorphic was dark, but really beautiful in the dark. And there was trying to capture like the essence of the scene and emotion. We're like, how can we tell the audience what we're feeling, or what these characters are feeling, in the darkest way possible, like not like literally in the dark. And so it was tricky, and the setups took a long time, but that's what it was for us. It was just the influences were a lot of David Lynch, and a lot, you know, I've been seeing things on Netflix like Queen's Gambit and The Devil All the Time, just that mood, and really turned us on.
Yeah, thank you. Phil, how about for you? What set the style and tone for you?
I mean, I guess aside from the stuff that I mentioned earlier, the landscape of Florida and like the television I grew up watching, I think it was important to me to, like, I spent a lot of my childhood. We lived not too far from Disney World, and we went to Epcot Center quite a bit. And the feeling and tone of Epcot Center at that time in like the late 80s, early 90s really made an impression on me because it had a very distinct tone that it doesn't quite exist these days, but it was all at once dry and whimsical, sometimes frightening. And I wanted to take those emotions and feelings and combine it with all the other stuff that I mentioned before. And I tried to do that both visually, but also through the music. The music had a very specific tone to it that I wanted to recapture. I wrote the music for the film as well. So it was like, I wanted to take these shades of like easy listening and orchestral and electronic music and combine it to create a unique feeling. And then to also combine that with the landscape of suburban Florida, which was important to me to go and shoot a lot of that footage in my hometown. A lot of people see the film, they think it's all stock footage, but 99% of the footage in the film is stuff that I just shot in my hometown. Even the flamingos, which I spent a really hot afternoon crawling on my hands and knees in between all these flamingos, sweating my tuchus off. And it was quite an experience. So I wanted to take those feelings. I think it's important to me not to make it feel like a parody of one specific thing or like a spoof. I didn't want it to feel that way. So I wanted to feel like a lot of different familiar things, but have it create its own unique feeling. So yeah, that was kind of the genesis of it.
Thank you. And it reminds me, I went to Epcot Center in, God, what was it? It must have been 1990. Mm-hmm. It's funny, I hadn't thought about it at the time until you mentioned it, but I definitely get the same vibes from your film. It reminds me very much of that experience.
Then I've done my job, I guess.
Right. So Tom and Rob, same question for both of you. I know you mentioned, the image of the fern on the bike, but once you kind of had that jumping off point, how did you decide what this film was going to look and feel like?
Go ahead, Tom.
I think like a North Star of ours was like a children's book for adults in some ways, but we never really said it. We just sort of wanted it to feel almost like a children's book. But we put a lot of work into the shot list because it is a narrated short. It relied heavily on the voiceover. So we aimed to reduce as much coverage as possible and communicate the poetry, so to speak, in composition, in camera move, and keep it really, really simple. I think that was a huge drum we were beating, even from a look and feel point of view. I think another thing that Rob and I would just constantly talk about before this project that kind of just maybe seeps into this project or foreign films. We're both children of immigrants and just wanted to make foreign films in America. So I think like Amelie is a big touchstone for us, and a few other greats that may make their way into some of our aesthetic as well. But yeah, maybe Rob has some more to add.
I would just add that it was cool. Just essentially how we created a shared vision between the two of us was just exchanging videos or films, watch this. So it was almost this unconscious like osmosis happening from media we were sending each other. And a part of that was making a playlist of songs, and that sort of set the mood too. And just picking different bits of language and be like, are you sure you're seeing, we're about to shoot. I really hope we're seeing the same thing. But we did. But yeah, it was, I think through sharing what we love. Yeah. Oscar needs help. I'll cut it there.
I hope Oscar's okay. So another thing that I really love about all these films is that they all have an emotional core, but they're also not afraid to use humor. And I think each of these films really balances the emotion and the humor really well. So I'm curious to ask you all kind of, how did you find that balance between the humor and the emotion of your stories? So let's start with you, Eric.
I think for me, finding that balance came after a lot of creating things that were one note and so just, you know, they were flat, and I thought like that's the way it was. And then having conversations about Amy from Outer Space was like, okay, this introvert is pretty ridiculous in his day to day, and also life is pretty freaking absurd. I don't care if if I'm fighting with my girlfriend, or like about how we make the bed, or like, you know, out at the grocery store. It's like these little petty things are so absurd, but the stakes are so high. So we were just trying to really dance with little moments, organic moments and beats, nothing too over the top, just real subtle, like a little blip of, you know, something being said, or just facial expression from the girl. But because, you know, I think that's what I find really interesting about film or in TV is like, when I watch a comedy, really, it's like there's so much underneath the laughter and like the banter. And although Amy from Outer Space is a drama, we were just like, we gotta get some light in here, and like it's possible. And some of these things were on accident. You know, we found them on the day, and that was really cool.
Yeah, that's great to hear of happy accidents. Okay, let's go with Phil. How did you find the tone and the mixture between, you know, the kind of the more emotional aspects of your story with the silly ones?
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely like walking a tightrope, you know, and whether or not it would, you know, I don't know if all the humor necessarily was successful. That's up to the audience, but I think it's just a reflection of who I am. I mean, the type of humor that I like is maybe a little outdated, you know, into the sense it's like, you know, I like the kind of the writing and dialogue that I would hear in like 60s, 70s films, like Mel Brooks kind of movies. But at the same time, I didn't want it to be too shticky. I wanted it to operate on more than one emotion at the same time, which is why I wanted to combine the feeling of those, that like the sillier elements, the jokier elements, with like that lush score and like the visuals, the retro futuristic visuals. So it was important to me to like not have it just operate on one note at once. So, and then I wanted to use the language of film as much as I could, because I feel like I didn't want all the humor to be dialogue based, because I feel like there's so much it can be done with film form. Like, for example, I would like to cut music out, or have an unexpected cut where I would just cut to something with no music. I didn't want to spoil anything, but so I wanted to combine all those things at once to make it seem like not just an average comedy, I would say, because, you know, I wanted to feel like this whimsical Disney-esque comedy, fantasy, musical. So it's never just one thing at once, basically.
Well said.
Thanks.
Tom and Robert, how about for you guys?
Rob, you want to start it off?
Yeah, we're gonna get Oscar a towel as well. Yeah, I think, I mean, just the idea of this romantic comedy about a poet. Hey, can you get Oscar a towel? He wants a towel. Romantic comedy about a poet, this guy, and a plant, I think, to begin with, is pretty fun. And then Tom at some point came up with the brilliant idea to have it narrated by a plant, which is more fun. But at the same time, this is an allegory about man's relationship, specifically white man, and his relationship to nature, and global warming and climate change. So it's at once hardcore, but I guess it's, you know, what you love eventually shines through. And I love nothing more than satire. So I think, and I think Tom's with me in that. And so I think it was always there that we wanted laughs. We wanted to keep it light and just have fun, and just create a warm, kind film. So yeah.
Oh yeah. Also, like we really enjoyed the editing process, as difficult as it usually is, and as difficult as it was. But again, like I think we were blessed with making a voiceover film, because anything that made us laugh on set, if that was sort of lost in the edit room, we would work so hard to bring it back with rewrites and working with our narrator and finding out what Sarah found to be funny, and if things that we thought were funny were still funny. And then, we did a few test screenings to see what people reacted to as funny and what people thought was just went right over their heads. And I think all in all, as long as we kept doing what we felt like we loved, and as Rob said, and also sort of not being smarter than our audiences, I think was another sort of flag that we flew.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, about being smarter than your audiences. That sometimes filmmakers forget about that. Yeah. And you bring up another question that I was actually just going to go into. So when it comes to editing, I would be curious for each of you, was there a moment in post, in the editing room, where something really changed for you in the film, and you went a different direction, or if not, was there something that just really clicked and you kind of got a sense, okay, I see what I have here. I like where this is going. So Eric, let's start with you.
Yeah, we were really lucky on this project, because everything was pretty linear, and it was a different experience than others, to where nothing really changed. We would watch some dailies, and then the DP would just say, Josh would just say, like, he said, I don't love this. And I was like, I think it's pretty good. And I did, but if he thinks something's a 7, or I think something's a 7, like, knowing we'll never get to a 10, we'll strive to get there for our vision together. And that really helped us. So we watched a couple scenes, and in that we said, we need a pickup day for this, and we need to order some more things to honor that tone in the scene. And really, with him, he had a really challenging time with the coloring, and that's his specialty. So I was like, but it went to that place of like, dude, this looks perfect. Like, I can't believe what you've done. Amazing. And he's like, it's not there. And I'm like, now you're being a crazy man. Like I'm gonna have to zip tie you if you don't back up. All in good spirits, but yeah, it was fun. It was a really great time in the edit room for this, because we were just on the same page, and it was just him and I. And again, it was just a different experience for this one. I'm really grateful that not a lot changed. So yeah, long way to say that. Thanks.
No, that's good to hear. Phil, anything in post happened to you that either really changed the film, or just kind of cemented the fact that things were going well? And
well, I never felt it was going well, because it was just such a long, drawn out process. This post took a very long time. I guess the lucky thing is, after the main shoot, we took a month off and then went back to shoot all the miniatures that you see in the film, and all like the effects that you see in the film. So we were able to at least shoot those around what we already shot and what we'd seen, so we could get some perspective on that. I would actually say I want to give a lot of credit to the actors for putting in such consistent and good performances, because we had a very rushed and kind of a crazy shoot that I feel like I was worried that by the time I got into the edit that nothing would kind of click. But I think a lot of the credit should go to them, because I feel like they all made it very cohesive in the middle of all the kind of craziness that we were experiencing on set. I guess the only thing that made it difficult was the dog, which, I mean, the dog I feel like is the real star of the film, but he Oliver the dog was great, but you know, the continuity with Oliver was kind of all over the place. You can't control. I mean, Oliver was not an animal actor by any means. It was his first film, but as a result, he was from shot to shot, he was just in a different position in every single take. But at a certain point, I just had to throw my arms to throw it all to the wind and be like, well, whatever happens, happens. So that was really the trickiest part, like technically about post-production, but it was just a very long process because I was like, every scene had so many layers of effects on it. It took so long to just put together. And at the same time, I was writing the score. So I was writing the score while editing it at the same time. So it took months. It was a very fraught kind of process that I would just say I kind of lost perspective by the end of it. And I had to just show the film to other people because I'm like, I have no idea if this makes any sense. This is cohesive. So I would say that was my post experience.
And for Tom and Rob, you mentioned a little bit, but any other major takeaways in the editing room?
Well, Phil, your answers are fantastic. Thank you. And we're in that too, where you're so deep in the quicksand, you forget what planet you're on and everything else. But honestly, what was sort of glorious and paralyzing at once was we could have made 1,000 different films because it was narrated and we basically had a bunch of B-roll. So we had so many options, and I guess what saved us was just to keep going and to have a great editor in Funky Lee Manor, who was just like a voice of reason. And usually he would tell us something and we'd be like, nah, I don't know about that. And then we would eventually come back to it. So we learned that editors know best many times. Yeah. Tom?
The other thing just to I wanted to double back on was, it was just for the longest time. I mean, the original screenplay that Rob wrote was narrated by the poet. And as you can see from the final film, it's narrated by the plant. And that took a lot of back and forth and co-directing and working with that watchtower editor between us. And then obviously working with Sarah to nail it. And that was a huge change that was really sort of spiritual for us and kind of just took the film to over the finish line.
So let's talk a little bit about acting. I would like to know for each of you, how do you approach directing actors in your films? And for Eric, you're directing yourself because you're the actor in your film. And Phil, you mentioned directing a dog. And Tom and Rob, you're directing a plant, as well as actors, of course. But let's start with you, Eric, and how do you approach yourself when you're doing both roles as actor and director?
I definitely don't love that. There's no other way to do that. And I wanted to direct this because it was so specific for me. And, I just needed time. I really needed time for certain scenes. And I just explained that to the crew. And I was just like, this scene is a little bit, I needed, let's have a moment. And I would actually talk to my buddy who ran sound. We would just have a conversation before a couple of these takes where I needed to talk to him. And that's simply what it was for me, to just sort of be in the space that I needed to be in. But everybody made it so easy because everybody was so talented, and we had a really small crew, but everybody was so talented and on, wearing 6 hats, that it really made it good for me, simple for me. But the other actors that were in it, just again, they really understood what they needed to do, and nothing really changed. Again, from script to the shoot day, everything was fairly the same. I mean, we cut so much, but just having very simple dialogue with them, just listening to them and hearing their take, and then trusting them, really. Just trusting them, because again, like I think I started by saying I want to control these things. And a lot of these amazing moments happen when I'm just like, I'm doing the opposite. I'm doing like this contrary action of just like, you take the wheel. Like, let's give it a take. And so trust was the big one for me.
Yeah, I think trust is the key word. And I guess that kind of pertains to everyone here, is finding that trust with your actors. How do you achieve that trust? So Phil,
yeah, I mean, I think Eric has an amazing point about trust. Like you said, I think we wouldn't hire the people we hired if we didn't trust their talent. And I feel like, you know, at least for our film, like it had so many moving parts that it was important for me at least, to get together with the actors before we got into the whirlwind of set. And, you know, before we started blowing a fan in their face and having a dog and a moving vehicle and all this other stuff. So I think the rehearsal process, I think, was the most pivotal part for me, because I feel like we really spent time. We went through the script, even though, you know, the script was only like 15 pages. We went through it many times just to like nail the tone, make sure it wasn't too broad or too muted, to find that perfect balance between naturalistic and zany, I guess. So I think that by the time we showed up on set, we all felt a little free and loose to, even by the time we had all the chaos happening with the sets and the moving parts, that they felt really prepared. And we did have some room to improvise, which was nice too. And the two leads are both seasoned theater actors, and their instincts were just spot on. Even if it's stuff we ended up not using, like it was all great, you know? So I was so relieved that my actors like really pulled the whole thing together. So I guess, yeah, I was lucky to have that talent. I mean, they're more talented than, yeah, I am. I don't know. So yeah, I think it was good to, I think it's good it's also important for me to meet people before the first day of shooting and just get to know them as people, because then you can sort of talk to them on their level. And I think that's the way to get a good performance out of them, I think. So.
And would you direct animals again?
Yeah, it was actually delightful. Oliver added a nice air of unpredictability. It was actually important to us, even in the close-ups when you didn't even see Oliver, just to have him there, because I feel like it added something. Because every so often his tail would kind of pop into the frame and things like that. And yeah, I mean, I think the unpredictability, even if Oliver didn't do everything you wanted him to do, we did get stuff that was usable, even if it was a little what we didn't expect. So, yeah,
that's great.
Yeah.
Tom and Rob, for you guys, how was it gaining that trust and working with your actor, especially also because you have an inanimate, so to speak, inanimate object in your film?
Totally. Yeah,
Rob?
I just realized the three actors in the film are not trained actors, not actors really. Yeah, it was a trip, but yeah, it goes back to something the other directors have said, which is like trust. Like we didn't have time to go check shots out. I couldn't run behind the camera and see what we got because we didn't have time. So I had to trust Tom, and if he said it was good enough, it was like, okay, just keep cooking.
Absolutely. Yeah. Going all the way back to the very first conversation when Rob came to me with the poem, I said, hell yeah. Like he was like, do you want to do this? And I said, absolutely. Only if you act in it and we co-direct. And it was an instant yeah. And like from that point on, I think that was sort of like the playground or the sandbox that we built in. And I think every take was so playful, very expansive. We wanted to keep everything really light. And then also kind of going back to the no coverage approach, we didn't have time, that's for sure. But also like 2 days before the shoot, when our DP was like, you guys got to cut this shot list in half. We basically just like focused on breathing on facial reactions, and like sort of more going in a meditative approach to the performance, as opposed to really doing too much, because it was very focused on the camera move, the composition, and then also the voiceover to sort of shine. Yeah, the directing the plant was actually something that I found to be extremely exciting, because there's this one shot that no matter what, every time I see it, I still see one of the leaves smile a little bit, and like that's maybe just for me, but it happens, and it's a pleasure to see it each time. But yeah, Sarah Snook killed it. She's very well known for playing an American on Succession, but like really highlighting her beautiful accent, and then working with her. Rob and I just had a blast, kind of just toying with different versions of the script and different backstories of who this plant was and what are the ancestors of this plant, and so there were a lot of different dimensions. There's a lot of dimensionality to all the characters in it.
We just have a few minutes left, so maybe we can kind of go through this question a little bit quicker before we end. But everyone here has also wrote their films as well. So I'm interested in, if you go back to your original script and some of your drafts, do you feel like what you ended up with, what we've just seen, is pretty close to what you wrote and what you were going for, or did it really evolve and change along the way?
Amy from Outer Space was pretty, I'd say 90% true from beginning to finish, and that's a new experience for me. And the new experience in that was like, again, back to the trust thing. Why don't I trust that this is what it was from the beginning? And I'm always trying to change things. Like, I don't feel like it's enough. I don't feel like I'm enough doing anything ever. So it's like, just stop. Like, let me just stop. Let's do this thing that, things will be tweaked here and there. But I really wanted to have a new experience with this one and not just be like, okay, now we're going to do this twist here. And like, why? Why do I need to do that? So yeah, it's very true to the first draft. And that one.
That's good to hear. Phil, how about for you?
Yeah, I would actually say, I mean, if we're speaking strictly about the shooting script, yes, it was pretty close to what we ended up with, but like the road to get to that shooting script, maybe it's just my writing like idea process. It's always like a very convoluted, I always start from the middle. It's always an amorphous blob, and I kind of build on it there. It stays in the outline phase for months and sometimes years. Like I said, I wanted to make a film about Florida for many years, ever since leaving there in my 20s. So I think by the time I get to the script phase, it's already pretty set, like what I want. But when I'm in the outline percolation kind of phase, that's when it's just like I throw every idea in the book, and it kind of ends up like a mess. Sure. There's always the beginning, the muddle, and the end, as we say. So yeah. So
thanks. Tom and Rob.
This film began as an animated action film based in Victorian England. Sorry, I had to make that joke. But it felt like we went really far, and yet it's still the same. But something that Tom taught me was, Tom, do you want to tell them about the three films?
Well, yeah, I mean, Phil just made it a little bit better with Muddled, but yeah, you have 3 films is sort of something we kept saying. You got your script, you have your footage, and then you have your final film, and we talked about it before going in, so I think we sort of really had this like sort of beginner's mind to whatever would be. But with all the revisions and changing who the actual narrator is, I think Rob, you would agree with this. It's like Rob's original insight, his original poem was always the right answer. You're already doing it. You kind of had the right intention. It's the road, as Phil said, and how we got there that sort of made it feel different. But yeah, it was always going to be, the film was always going to choose what it wanted to be.
I mean, in a way, it seems like everyone is kind of, going back to trusting their own instincts, and kind of having the courage and the space to know that what you wanted to get at, maybe that was the truth, and having the, the fortitude to keep going and trusting yourself. So I wanted to thank everybody again so much for being here. And more importantly than that, thanks for, creating these original works and putting your work out there, putting yourselves out there. I hope to see more of your work, and everybody at home, look up all these filmmakers, see what else they've done, what they're going to do. It's a great way of learning more about each person here and getting to see a lot of their work. And, please watch the other short film programs. There's a lot of great stuff. So thanks again, everybody, and take care.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thanks.